Of Alexander's plans, little reliable information survives. The far-reaching schemes for the conquest of the Western Mediterranean and the setting up of a universal monarchy. Recorded by Diodorus Siculus, a 1st-century Greek historian, are probably based on a later forgery. If not, they were at once jettisoned by his successors and the army. Had he lived, he would no doubt have completed the conquest of Asia Minor, where Paphlagonia, Cappadocia, and Armenia still maintained an effective independence. But in his later years, Alexander's aims seem to have been directed toward exploration, in particular of Arabia and the Caspian. In the organization of his empire, Alexander had been content in many spheres to improvise and adapt what he found. His financial policy is an exception, though the details cannot be wholly recovered. It is clear that he set up a central organization with collectors, perhaps independent of the local satraps. That this proved a failure was partly due to weaknesses in the character of Harpalus, his chief treasurer. But the establishment of a new coinage with a silver standard based on that of Athens in place of the old bimetallic system current both in Macedonia and in Persia helped trade everywhere. And, combined with the release of vast amounts of bullion from the Persian treasuries, gave a much-needed fillip to the economy of the whole Mediterranean area. Alexander's foundation of new cities, Plutarch speaks of over 70, initiated a new chapter in Greek expansion. No doubt, many of the colonists, by no means volunteers, deserted these cities, and marriages with native women led to some dilution of Greek ways, but the Greek, rather than Macedonian, influence remained strong in most of them, and since the process was carried further by Alexander's Seleucid successors, the spread of Hellenic thought and customs over much of Asia, as far as Bactria and India, was one of the more striking effects of Alexander's conquests. His plans for racial fusion, on the other hand, were a failure. The Iranian satraps were perhaps not efficient. 4 out of 18, 10 were removed or executed, with what justice it is no longer possible to say. But, more important, the Macedonians, leaders and men alike, rejected the idea, and in the later Seleucid Empire the Greek and Macedonian element was to be clearly dominant. How far Alexander would have succeeded in the difficult task of coordinating his vast dominions, had he lived, is hard to determine. The only link between the many units that went to make up an empire more disparate than that of the Habsburgs, and far larger, was his own person, and his death came before he could tackle this problem. What had so far held it all together was his own dynamic personality. He combined an iron will, an ability to drive himself and his men to the utmost with a supple and flexible mind. He knew when to draw back and change his policy, though he did this reluctantly. He was imaginative, and not without romantic impulses. Figures like Achilles, Heracles, and Dionysus were often in his mind, and the salutation at the oracle of Ammon clearly influenced his thoughts and ambitions. Ever afterward, he was swift in anger, and under the strain of his long campaigns this side of his character grew more pronounced. Ruthless and self-willed, he had increasing recourse to terror, showing no hesitation in eliminating men whom he had ceased to trust, either with or without the pretense of a fair trial. Years after his death, Cassander, son of Antipater, a regent of the Macedonian Empire under Alexander, could not pass his statue at Delphi without shuddering. Yet he maintained the loyalty of his men, who followed him to the Hyphasis without complaining, and continued to believe in him throughout all hardships. Only when his whim would have taken them still farther into unknown India did he fail to get his way. As a general, Alexander is among the greatest the world has known. He showed unusual versatility, both in the combination of different arms and in adapting his tactics to the challenge of enemies who commanded novel forms of warfare, the Shaka nomads, the Indian hill tribes, or Porus. With his elephants, his strategy was skillful and imaginative, and he knew how to exploit the chances that arise in every battle and may be decisive for victory or defeat. He also drew the last advantage from victory by relentless pursuit. His use of cavalry was so effective that he rarely had to fall back upon his infantry to deliver the crushing blow. Alexander's short reign marks a decisive moment in the history of Europe and Asia. His expedition and his own personal interest in scientific investigation brought many advances in the knowledge of geography and natural history. His career led to the moving of the great centers of civilization eastward and initiated the new age of the Greek territorial monarchies. It spread Hellenism in a vast colonizing wave throughout the Middle East and created, if not politically at least economically and culturally, a single world stretching from Gibraltar to the Punjab, open to trade and social intercourse and with a considerable overlay of common civilization and the Greek koine as a lingua franca. It is not untrue to say that the Roman Empire, the spread of Christianity as a world religion, and the long centuries of Byzantium were all in some degree the fruits of Alexander's achievement.